boss events are where we get to challenge the strongest Bloons in BTD6. They have millions of health, special properties, unique round sets, and epic entrances. But one boss attacks every week, the map and modifiers constantly change, and our strategies are always evolving. So this is the history of Bloons TD6's boss events. July 26th, 2021, BTD6 rolled out version 27, and with it, Bloonarius the Inflator, the first ever Boss Bloon. He's super tanky, spawns tons of minions, and makes a rainy mess everywhere he goes, but players don't get to face him whenever they want. Instead, Bloonarius would attack a map every Saturday, and it was our job to defend it. Week 1, Bloonarius raided Monkey Meadow, the most iconic map in the game. Players loaded in knowing they had to beat 5 tiers of the boss, each one growing in difficulty. Instead of the normal map, we were met with a rainy Monkey Meadow that had glowing green mushrooms and a warning sign up top that said boss appears in 39 rounds. To prepare our defenses, we knew we'd have to farm, but it was way more than anyone thought. In Bloons, farming is any action that makes you more money than normal, and up to this point, we'd never had a real reason to farm as fast as possible. In other game modes, you either aren't allowed to farm, or you have so much time that you don't have to worry about being fast. So players were in new waters, and it was pretty painful to watch. I went with a banana bank into an IMF loan, while others spammed banana plantations, neither of which were optimized at all, but gave us some extra money for the fight. Round 40 came, and instead of the usual Moab that spawns, we got Bloonarius. He burst onto the screen with 20,000 health and 3 skulls spread out across his health bar. Mind you, the normal Moab only has 200 health, so Bloonarius is 100 times tankier. On top of this, he bleeds Bloons when damaged, and when Bloonarius' health reaches a skull, he spews out a rush of much stronger balloons. So you need the single target damage to pop him, but also some crowd control to handle the skulls. The most common way to do this was with a tax zone and some support, as it shreds Moab class balloons for a relatively cheap price, but there were tons of combinations you could use, all of which spent most of the player's money, and we still had tiers 2 through 5 left, with them appearing every 20 rounds from here on out. And each tier increases his health and more difficult minions spawn. So we sold most of our defenses and went back to farming. Whether it was a bunch of marketplaces, some BRFs, or anything else, no one knew what they were doing. We were just stumbling through it together. For tiers 2, 3, and 4, all we had to do was place more tier 5 monkeys and it was enough. The tier 5 though was a little different. Here, Bloonarius jumps from 750,000 HP at the tier 4 fight to 3 million at the tier 5. This massive amount of health calls for something a bit bigger than what we've been using. So to deal with this new threat, we built a Paragon, the other big addition that came in this update. Made to be the ultimate Bloon poppers, Paragons are created by combining the 3 tier 5 upgrades of the Dart or Boomerang monkeys. I opted for the Boomer's Glaive Dominus, but like many others, was disappointed in its performance. On top of the 3 tier 5 monkeys, it costs a whopping $400,000, more than we had spent the rest of the game combined, and it was barely able to beat the boss. There were many reasons for this, but more on that later. Beating Bloonarius basically by itself makes it seem like the Glaive Dominus is more than strong enough, but that was just the normal event, the one made so everyone can participate. I mean, I even have a series where I speedrun normal bosses with brand new accounts. But beating this fight unlocks the Elite Boss event, ones that can give even the best players a tough time, and Elite Boss fights will be the focus of this video going forward as they drove players to get better. Elite Bloonarius has more health and spawns much deadlier balloons, so we, as a community, had to step it up a notch. The tier 1 fight has 50,000 HP and 7 skulls, so we needed way more money and defenses than last time. I went for a tax zone for boss damage and 2 boomerangs to clean up the 70 ceramics that come with each skull, but others, like Ethan Reed, popped him with a spike storm and locked up the back of the track with recursive clusters. What we learned in this fight was that we don't need to pop Bloonarius as fast as possible. We can take our time if it means making more money through farming. So we wouldn't have our defenses fully set up until we're ready to pop him. And while our farming was pretty bad, after a couple days of trying to beat Bloonarius, it got a bit better. We started by building a bunch of 300 farms throughout the early game, and after we were making a decent amount of money, started to upgrade them to 420 BRFs, as they make the most per round of the tier 4 farm. While this was going on, we took on the tier 2 fight, where Bloonarius jumps up to 300,000 health on just round 60. And to deal with this massive health bar, players And to deal with this massive health bar, players unanimously decided the Mad was our best choice. He does tons of damage to Bloonarius and the BFBs he spawns at each skull, only leaving the ceramics inside to be popped, which we can handle with boomers or bomb shooters once again. But after this fight, we made the best farming decision of the early era. We sacrificed a bunch of BRFs to a Monkeyopolis. This bottom path farm makes more money the more you sacrifice, and it was crazy efficient. Plus, any farm you build in its radius afterwards makes an extra 20% just for being near it. How good this was, we weren't sure yet, but it was used to accelerate our income. For the rest of the fight, we just filled the map with farms and made the strongest towers possible. For the tier 3, it was a Sun Temple, the tier 4 was a VTSG, and the tier 5, we spent the rest of our money getting as many support monkeys as possible, and if we had enough money left over, we'd pick up an Apex Plasma Master or Glaive Dominus. The lack of understanding how they work and poor farming techniques made Paragons almost an afterthought in early bosses, even though tier 5 Elite Bloonarius has 40 million health that we have to chunk through, and spawns 4 fortified bads with each skull. But our VTSG and supporting cast were enough to pop the elite boss about 75% of the way through the map. After winning, players and YouTubers band together to find better farming strats. It was tough as we had to account for defending the rounds on different maps and setting up our monkeys in time for round 40. But by week 2, we actually had several farming breakthroughs and Bloonarius was not ready for them. This time, Bloonarius challenged us on Park Path. It's similar in difficulty to Monkey Meadow, but our 3 farming advancements made this week much easier. The first was after getting Benjamin down, we built a bunch of 200 farms before picking up the tier 3 upgrades. These snowball much faster as you can get several of them down pretty quickly and then go back to upgrade them. The second was getting a discount village after we filled out the bottom right with 6 farm. This makes tier 3 and lower upgrades in its range 15% cheaper, saving us a ton of money while we upgrade the farms to 320 banana plantations. And the third boost in income came much later in the game where we overclocked our banana central, letting it produce 8 crates per round instead of 5 for an extra $3,600 a round. This let us afford everything we got last week plus the second Paragon. So we had the Apex Plasma Master, Glaive Dominus, VTSG, a support Sun Temple, and tons of tier 5 monkeys by the end of the fight, making this week much easier than last. On top of this, players started to figure out how to make Paragons deal more damage. We just needed to get more pops on the monkeys being combined and sacrifice a bunch of lower tiers to them. So if we're building the Apex Plasma Master, building a ton of Super Monkey fan clubs, and getting pops with our Dart Monkeys before making the Paragon will make it much stronger. And this strength is marked by its degree, which is a number from 1 to 100. The higher the degree, the stronger the Paragon. Life was good. We headed into week 3 with more confidence, even though Bloonarius challenged us to a harder map. Cracked. This was the first time we fought on an intermediate map instead of a beginner, but Ninja Kiwi, the company that made BTD6, lowered the difficulty from medium to easy to balance this out. This meant the Bloons moved 9% slower, while towers and upgrades cost 15% cheaper. So while the map was harder, the lowered prices and players getting better at bosses made for the easiest one yet, as players were getting an extra tier 5 monkey for each tier and degree 40 plus Paragons for the final fight, adding a ton of damage. This was when most players learned that Paragons get bonus boss damage every 20 degrees, so it was a big milestone. And even with this extra money spent to make the Paragon stronger, we were still winning with over $1 million left in the bank. Were things getting too easy? Were we getting too good at farming? Ha! No, Ninja Kiwi had been taking it easy on us. Week 4's fight was on Bloonarius Prime and was a standout in difficulty. Not only was it an intermediate map, but it has 2 tracks you need to defend and the prices went back to the normal, medium. For the first time, we actually had to spend a decent amount of money defending the early game instead of just popping the Bloons with our free Dart Monkey and some cheap towers. And while it wasn't that much money, every dollar spent in the early game compounds for the rest of the fight, giving us much less to work with later on. Thankfully, Ninja Kiwi had planned this exact boss fight and made a special path for Bloonarius. Instead of just going down the left side of the map and exiting, he crosses over to the right side of the map, giving us much more time to pop him. Even with this, it was pretty tough to take him down. Most of our towers were delayed, as we didn't get our full defenses up until Bloonarius was about halfway through the map each time. Like on tier 4, where players didn't have the money for a VTSG until a bit into the fight, whereas in the previous 2 weeks, we'd have it ready before the fight began. Luckily, normal Bloons no longer pose a threat, as there's no way they can get through a Sun God, and with them out of the picture, we're just left with Bloonarius on a pretty long map. So tiers 4 and 5 were popped with the same monkeys as week 3. Farming wasn't the only thing we were working on though. players wanted to find cheaper ways to deal with each tier, as any money saved could be poured into farms. People were experimenting with all sorts of things, popping Bloonarius super fast, taking their time, or just using new monkey combos, but not much stuck. Until week 5, when Bloonarius was on Cubism, and the sticky bomb made an appearance. This tier 4 monkey costs less than half of a tax zone, has more range, and is much less dependent on where you place it. And somehow, he has enough damage to completely pop Bloonarius. You just need a cleanup tower or 2 to handle the ceramics at each skull. This change saved us over 10 grand on round 40, which is a whole extra farm or halfway to a BRF upgrade. And this could be spent on farms right away, so we generated more money during the tier 1 fight than normal, and we had the rest of the game for this money to compound. And thank goodness we found this new tech, because this was the first boss event to be played on impoppable difficulty, meaning towers and upgrades cost 20% more than on medium, and we only had 50 lives to work with. The only other innovation this fight was putting a maelstrom at the back of the track and using its ability at every skull to pop the ceramics. And while effective, it has never really stuck. It's not that much better than other options like more glaives or recursive clusters, and you have to time the ability, leaving room for human error. But once again, we won with a VTSG, a degree 40 plus Dartagon, and a ton of support monkeys, though we spent just about every dollar we had by the end of the fight, as those increased prices really took a toll on us. Now, I'd say the early era of boss events lasts from week 1 through week 16, and here, on week 6, is where we broke the game. Up to this point, we'd been using Benjamin and farms to make money, as that's the obvious choice, but this week we were forced to use Hbomb as our hero. Naturally, players like myself paired him with druids, like using the Avatar of Wrath for the tier 2 fight, but this led to an accidental discovery. What if we made money with the druid's middle path? They have an ability that generates money every time we use it, and it makes more the more farms are in their radius. So if we put some druids in the middle of our farming operation, we can get some extra cash out, and they help us defend the round. The only thing is that these make more money the longer the rounds take, as they have a 40-second cooldown on their ability. So we started making the rounds take longer and longer. But wait, what if we made a round last forever? Would we get infinite money? In short, yes. And that's exactly what tons of players did. On top of the normal stalling where we slowed the balloons, there are rounds where regrows spawn, which are balloons that regenerate layers every few seconds. So we can make a round last forever if we keep pushing them back towards the start and they heal faster than we damage them. And perfect for us, an easy time to do this is on round 39. 1 round before Bloonarius comes. This does require us to have a solid defense set up to make sure nothing leaks, and several farms in range of the druids to make sure it's profitable. You see, druids were only allowed to use their ability 3 times per round, but we could get around this by selling him and getting a new one anytime his ability stopped working. And as long as you had 6 or more farms in his range, it was profitable. And this was endless. I made a video about getting a VTSG for the tier 1 fight this week, but most players only did it for a few minutes, getting a huge farming lead on the boss. Whenever I stall farmed, I'd go until I had a banana research facility, and from there, the rest of the fight was a piece of cake. Outside of cheesing the boss, the next 6 weeks were dominated by druid farming. We'd get about 6 greater production farms down and start building 041 druids in the middle of them. And as long as we used their abilities when they came off cooldown, we'd make tons of money. Outside of this though, not much changed. The same defenses were used at every tier, but cleaning up the ceramics in the early tiers was easier with all our druids down. And the extra money we had from this new method would get us either more support monkeys or higher degree paragons for the final fight. This type of farming was so effective that players even overlooked other forms, like boat farming. We had the perfect opportunity to find how strong making money with merchantmen was, with week 10 taking place on skate. But with druids being more than enough and players not taking the trade empire seriously, we moved on not knowing what could have been. In fact, probably my biggest miss of all time was making a video on if boats are better than banana farms. And I said no because of how expensive it was to start up. Luckily for me, the community seemed to agree and druid farming remained the norm. For the rest of the update, Bloonarius remained about the same. No breakthroughs and no crazy changes. But then week 12 brought in a new twist. Ninja Kiwi banned the true sun god, so we couldn't make our VTSG that carries the tier 4 and 5 fights. To get around this, we leaned on paragons a little more, getting the Apex Plasma Master for round 100, then adding the Glaive Dominus and just about every tier 5 monkey for the final fight. But this was the last boss event before update 28 was released, and with it, a new boss, a new paragon, and some balance changes. For 4 straight weeks, we faced the new boss, Lich. Unlike Bloonarius, who came over from Bloons Monkey City, Lich was brand new to the franchise and players did not know how to deal with him. To start, he's about twice as fast as Bloonarius, but has much less health. He absorbs temporary buffs like overclocks and stronger stims, healing itself and stunning affected towers for 5 seconds. If you sell a tower while Lich is on the field, he gets his health back, and at each skull, Lich becomes invulnerable, revives recently popped blimps, and summons a Lich soul that steals lives while it moves along the track. And you aren't able to damage Lich again until his soul and all reanimated Bloons are dealt with. Needless to say, he is way different from Bloonarius, and the addition of Lich brought a ton of players to the game. It was really weird for players like me to go away from monkeys like the Alchemist, as we'd place them to defend the rounds between the tiers, but have to sell them when Lich appeared. His heal was no joke, and it made it awkward to defend. There was one thing that was certain though. You have to pop the Lich Soul quickly, as every few seconds this thing would steal 11 lives. Luckily, he has to go through your mana shield first, but now you can lose even without leaking. The common strat for tier 1 was 2 sticky bomb ninjas and some support. But unlike Bloonarius, these supports were not for large rushes of balloons. No, they were for the chained Moabs that he reinflates with 4 times health and 1.6 times speed. So your sticky bombs would pop the Lich Soul as fast as possible and then move over to the chained Moabs. And if you had the money, you could add some overdrives to speed this up. But boy was it common for these guys to get through, causing players to exit to home and load back in to give it another try. This led to a huge bug though. If you loaded back in and didn't hit play, Lich would be moving through the track, but no other Bloons would spawn, making it very easy to focus him down, and he'd have no Bloons to reanimate. So you could beat the tier 1 elite fight with just 1 sticky bomb. Luckily, it was easy to avoid, as you just had to hit play, so if you wanted the challenge, it wasn't an issue. The tier 2 fight was handled roughly the same as Bloonarius, as a Mad or Avatar of Wrath could pop Lich and all his spawn, but the tier 3 fight was a doozy. In the past, we'd get a Sun Temple a little bit into the fight and whittle Bloonarius down while we farmed some more. But that didn't work against Lich. The temple didn't have the burst damage to take out the soul in time, either causing it to steal a bunch of lives at every skull or even make it to the exit. Because of this, the tier 3 fight was the hardest part and would make or break your run. The next choice players went with was a Mad, as it does tons of damage to Lich, his soul, and the reanimated Bloons. But because we can't buff it with an Alchemist or Overclock without healing Lich, it didn't have the damage either. So what we had to do was get several damage dealers to take this guy out. I'm talking a Mad, Flying Fortress, Tax Zone, and some support monkeys like a Cripple Moab and Super Brittle. If you got past this though, you were golden. All thanks to the Ascended Shadow, the new Paragon added alongside Lich. This Ninja Paragon throws shurikens for constant damage that won't let any Bloons by, flash bombs that stun anything that isn't a boss or bad, and most importantly, throws a ghostly sticky bomb at the strongest Bloon on screen, dealing ridiculous damage, taking out Lich and his soul very quickly. The only downside is that he costs a whopping $600,000, so we'd save up and get him for the tier 4 fight, and in the tier 5, we'd add the Glaive Dominus and Apex Plasma Master, ideally getting them to degree 40 or higher. During this time, we filled the map with central markets, as each one gives us 3 lives at the end of every round. And while we don't plan on leaking, the Elite Soul does steal quite a bit of lives, so this gives us a nice buffer. Something to note is that the Glaive Dominus also got better with this update. Ninja Kiwi tweaked some of his stats to even out parts that weren't contributing as much as others, so his burn, shred, and orbiting rangs all got much better. What's crazy is that this isn't the end of what got added in update 28. Possibly the biggest change in boss history started here. Ranked boss leaderboards were added to each event, with players getting rewarded for who can pop the boss the fastest, and they get penalized for stalling the rounds. Unfortunately, the most competitive ranked boss category is on normal mode, as it's much less annoying, but nonetheless, the push for first place led to tons of farming innovations, as the more money you had, the easier it was to pop each boss quickly. Now, we're not going to dive into the ranked metas in this video, as that's a completely different topic and one that I'm not too familiar with, but if you guys want, I could team up with someone like Punji to make a sequel. Outside of this, the update brought 3 massive balance changes. The first was putting a time limit on cash generating abilities. Now, they can only be used in the first 3 minutes of each round, preventing infinite money exploits. Ninja Kiwi felt stall farming did not fit the spirit of the game, so they got rid of them altogether. The second was reworking the jungle druids to have more popping power while not being quite so good at farming. They made the tier 3's vine now drop spiky thorns on the track that pops Bloons that touch it, and the jungle's bounty can now grab 2 Bloons at once. Both of of which dropped these thorns, and they made his ability worse, increasing the cooldown from 40 seconds to 60, but now it generates slightly more money per use. And the third was balancing the crosspath of the banana farm. Banana salvage was never picked up over valuable bananas, so it now gives plus 10% sellback to the farm. We didn't know it at the time, but such a buff will change farming forever. With this update, the community was split on how to make money. Some people, like me, continued to combine farms with druids, while others went back to surrounding a discount village with 200 farm. One thing was for certain though, the druid of the jungle was a beast at popping the early game. It was cheap, easy to build, and before you even upgrade it, the base druid helps a ton with the early rounds. Even with week 2 being on a much shorter map, the 030 druid could pop everything but camos, so we just back him up with a crossbow, as that's an easy upgrade from our free dart monkey. This cheap defense let us spend more on farms and anti-lich towers, and we needed it because week 2 was on Streambed, a much tougher map than week 1's Carved, and even that map gave us trouble. But the community found a combo to make the tier 1 fight a bit easier. All we had to do was get a Moab shove and some maulers to back up our sticky bomb ninja. The heli pilot would stall the chained Moabs long enough for the maulers to pop them, and the sticky bomb would one-shot the soul. This cheap defense set us up nicely for tiers 2 and 3. The money saved would let us get our Avatar of Wrath online at round 60 and give us plenty of money for the tier 3 fight. Once again, this was the most difficult of the 5, but because we had extra money, we actually got to go back to the Sun Temple, maxing out its sacrifices while also having enough money for towers like a Mad and support. On its own, the temple isn't enough, but having one for the rest of the game makes the ending easier. And the rest was just like last week. Get a Paragon for round 100, fill the map with central markets, and get the other 2 Paragons for the tier 5 fight. And if you somehow had the money, you could round it out with a VTSG, but that's not needed. It's funny that it just took a 3rd Paragon and some buffs to the Glaive Dominus to make the VTSG not the go-to defender anymore. In fact, this was the last time he'd be in the meta, as to this day, the VTSG isn't really used in boss events. And while I would fast forward through some of these weeks, the next fight had 3 breakthroughs that have stood the test of time, all because of one thing: Benjamin was banned. Week 15 was on a beginner map, the cabin, but we only had 50 lives. The difficulty was set to hard, and we had to pick a different hero. Most chose Sada for her insane popping power, which let us focus on farming, but without Ben's extra cash generation, our snowball started off much slower, not letting us get enough money for our farms and boss defense by round 40. So what did we do? Instead of getting a bunch of 200 farms and upgrading them to banana plantations afterwards, we made them all 203 marketplaces. They make just as much money per round, but we're finally going to take advantage of that increased sellback, and we needed the extra lives because we only started with 50 this week. Once round 40 hit, we sold as many marketplaces as we needed to afford the sticky bomb, Moab shove, and supporting cast, which was less than normal thanks to Sada. After beating Lich, we were pretty far behind compared to past weeks, but that's where the second innovation came, exiting to home and loading back in. This was different from the glitch in week 13 in that we did it after beating the first fight, not in the middle. You see, boss events auto start each round, not giving you much time to buy or sell monkeys, and definitely not enough time to think through and thoroughly place them. However, if you exit to home and load back in, the rounds don't start up again until you hit play. This had been known for a while, but most players adopted this strat in week 15 when we were super behind on farming. This let us sell all our defenses in range of a flavored trades and set up farms before starting the next round. And if you combine this with taking the time to buy a discount village, the money saved was actually quite a bit. So much so that we basically caught back up to where we'd normally be, which led to the third big change. Remember how tier 3 Lich is just better and is where most players would lose? Well, that changes today. It's time for the round 80 Paragon. That's right, in the late 70s, players would stop spending all their money on farms and start saving up for the Apex Plasma Master, the cheapest Paragon and also the easiest one to get degrees on thanks to the monkey knowledge point that lets us place 2 crossbow masters. This would essentially bankrupt us as we'd have to sell a ton of farms to be able to afford them, but it came with 2 huge advantages. The first is that he can solo the boss, even as a degree 1, and the second is that we can sell them right after the fight. The 80s last long enough that only a few rounds would pass by even if you take your time popping him. So we'd sell the Paragon and put all that cash back into farms. We'd lose a bit of money doing this maneuver, but it was well worth it. In the past, we'd have a ton of money tied up in defenses like a Sun Temple, but here we'd put most of that into BRFs and defend with monkeys that will turn into Paragons later on, getting pops on them for higher degrees. This let us easily get a Paragon for the tier 4 fight and all 3 of them for the tier 5 one, wrapping it up nicely. The next week was the last of the Lich streak. It was similar to the cabins in that we didn't have Ben and only 50 lives, but Ninja Kiwi buffed the Lich Soul to have more health and prevent it from getting one-shot so easily. Starting this week, the Sticky Bomb Ninja can't pop it with one bomb, causing many more lives to be lost. Some tried a second Sticky Bomb Ninja to speed things up, but even this would get you super low on lives. The play was to get our normal defense of a Sticky Bomb, Moab Shove, and some Maulers, but upgrade 1 or 2 of them to Moab Assassins. We'd use their ability on the Soul to pop it quickly, not giving it a chance to steal any lives from us. This wouldn't work at every skull though, as the cooldown was too long, but it would save a bunch of lives throughout the fight, and we could get these online by selling a marketplace or 2 if needed. What was nice was Ninja Kiwi gave us a very easy map in 4 circles to let us get used to the tougher early Soul. Luckily, the change at tiers 2 through 5 weren't as noticeable. The Avatar of Wrath could still pop the Soul fast enough to not worry, and we'd have plenty of lives from farming with marketplaces and central markets later on. For the next 22 weeks, we went back and forth between Bloonarius and Lich. Week 17 was Bloonarius on Candy Falls, and 18 was Lich on Alpine Run. Both were very easy weeks, but this is when I'd say our farming went from decent to good. Starting with Bloonarius, we crushed him with our new defenses and tricks of making money. But this was the first time that I saw someone pull off boat farming. BTD6's Monkey got 16 merchantmen down and then upgraded one of them to a trade empire on round 58. They provide some solid defense for the rounds and make tons of money. This caught the eyes of many players, including myself, but because we didn't know the optimal order yet, it didn't make the waves it should have. That being said, people added it to their bag in case a boss event happens on a map with tons of water. The 2 additions versus Lich made an immediate impact though. The first was putting a rubber to gold alchemist at the start of the track after beating the tier 1 boss. This guy occasionally throws special potions that make affected balloons provide plus 100% cash per pop, and if he ever pops lead balloons, they award an extra $50 thanks to his previous lead to gold upgrade. So for just $6,000, the alchemist adds to your defenses and makes you tons of extra cash. And the second, much bigger find was the Minneapolis. This took the community by storm. Instead of surrounding a village with as many BRFs as possible and making a massive Monkeyopolis, we discovered how efficient a smaller one can be, specifically making a Monkeyopolis with only 2 BRFs in it. This setup costs roughly the same as 3 BRFs, but makes the same as 4. Plus, you get the benefit of the Monkey City to any farm placed in its range after. This had been the farming strat in the top runs of Ranked, but here is when everyone found out about it. And these 2 changes made an insane impact on our farm and how we beat the bosses the next couple weeks. We were able to get an Apex Plasma Master and Sun Temple for the tier 3 fight, 2 Paragons for the 4th tier, and anything we wanted for the tier 5 fight. At this point in time, bosses got easy, to the point where I expected to beat the normal and elite versions first try on stream every week. There were only 2 more events before the next update. Bloonarius on End of the Road, and Lich on Moon Landing. And even with us crushing the last few weeks, a few more changes to the meta occurred here. Lead to Gold Alchemist started appearing before round 40. A base elk was used to pop the leads on 28 and 30, while the Lead to Gold was purchased for rounds 37 and 38, as 29 lead balloons spawned between these 2 rounds, generating $1,450, covering most of its $26.50 price tag. But it solved our lead issue and easily built into a rubber to gold in the 40s. The next change was a strategy leaking in from ranked play. Because their goal was to pop the boss as fast as possible, they'd sell all their farms after round 39 and spend it on defenses at the start of the track. This was much different to elite play because we thought we had to farm through the boss to have enough money to beat the next tiers, but that changed here. In recent weeks, we'd been building as many marketplaces as we could in the early game and selling them once we had the money to pivot to a Minneapolis. But now, we would sell everything going into the tier 1 fight, just like ranked players, and try to pop the boss in just a few rounds instead of fighting him until the late 40s. Fighting them this way let us sell our defenses and start working on the Minneapolis as early as round 42, though most players would get there on 43 or 44. And while we couldn't always afford the full Minneapolis right away, we'd have it up and running by the late 40s. This was especially nice for Lich, as his tier 1 soul was still a problem, but when we get to spend $50,000 defending, it gets much more reasonable. And the final big find was a Monkeyopolis glitch. Normally, the Monkeyopolis upgrade costs $5,000 for every every farm sacrificed, but we figured out a way to make the second Monkeyopolis purchased each game only cost 5 grand no matter how large it was. So we'd have our early game Miniopolis consisting of 2 BRF, and later on, when we had way more farms, we'd sell this and make as big of one as we could for super cheap. This would normally be in the 60s, making the tier 3 fight much easier as we could reliably get a Paragon for the fight. And like we said before, tiers 1 and 3 of Lich were the hardest, so these changes made a huge impact. But that brings us to December 8th, 2021, when version 29 was released and the Naverick of the Seas was added to the game, the Buccaneer Paragon that changed everything. Everybody wanted to use it, and Ninja Kiwi hinted that they put an emphasis on boat farming in the design. So we fought Bloonarius on skates and did our best to work in the trade empire. Some people tried to fill the map as early as possible with merchantmen, while others did the usual marketplaces into a Monkeyopolis first and used that to pay for their boats. No matter what they did, players found themselves having the normal amount of money or more by the tier 3 fight, making boat farming totally viable, especially since the boats make it so easy to defend the normal rounds. But what we weren't ready for was how strong this would make the Navarre. You see, pops and the number of upgrades sacrificed increase the power and degree of a Paragon. But what's new to the equation is how much cash these sacrifices have generated before being combined. And we learned that every dollar made is equal to 4 pops. So when you fill the map with tier 4 boats, all of which are making tons of money, you get a pretty strong Paragon. Without optimizing it all, players were getting degree 50 Navarks if they made it for the tier 4 fight, and Navarks in the 60s if they made it for the final tier 5 fight. And let me tell you, that was more than enough to beat Bloonarius, especially when combined with other Paragons like the Ascended Shadow and Glaive Dominus. The other two notable buffs in Update 29 were the Glaive Dominus getting much more damage on its press attack, and the Engineer getting $50 cheaper, and you can now target where he places his Bloon Trap if you crosspath it as a 0-1-4. Though, it'll take the Engineer over a month to really break into the meta. The next 3 weeks, players spammed the Naverick of the Seas, even on maps without the most water, like week 22 where Lich was on Resort, or week 23 when Bloonarius was on the new map Quiet Street. Neither of these have the room for 21 boats, which is what you want when boat farming. This number maxes out the Trade Empire buff that lets them make more money the more bucks you have down. Even with the limited space, the Buckagon was more than worth it and would carry through the end of the fight. Something fun about the Resort encounter was that Ben was banned and a new achievement got added to the game, David's versus Goliath. To complete it, you had to defeat a boss without using a hero, and because Resort is such an easy map, this was a very popular week for players to complete the challenge. But that brings us to Lich on Lotus Island, one of the most water-heavy maps in the game, and here is where players finally figured out how to boat farm, for the most part. The key? Farm like usual through the first 40 rounds and beat the tier 1 boss. At this point in time, we went with a bunch of marketplaces into a Sticky Bomb, Moab Shove, and Moab Assassin, but ranked players would defend the start of the track with an Embrittlement, Tax Zone, and a few overdrives, as this could pop them in about a minute without losing a single life. Anyway, from here we'd sell just about everything and buy a Trade Empire, plus as many merchantmen as possible. This stacks the buffs quickly and snowballs faster than any other farming method in the game, as every additional merchantman makes every boat generate $20 extra per round. And after getting 20 merchantmen, we'd get 10 central markets, as each one provides plus 10% income for every boat. And finally, we'd upgrade the bucks to flavored trades, so every boat was generating $1,040 per round. This let us get the Avatar of Wrath and or the Mad for the tier 2 fight, and so much money later on that you could really go any direction. Ranked players got a degree 40 Navark for the tier 3 fight, which is absurd and would pop each skull in about a second, while others would beat the round 80 encounter with a cheap Apex Plasma Master and wait to make a stronger Navark for the tier 4 fight. And while I don't have footage of it, I distinctly remember filling the map with favored trades and getting a Navark in the 60s for the 5th tier. It was very clear that the Navark was the strongest Paragon in the game, as it not only had the highest DPS, but was the fastest way to farm, and that money led directly into higher degrees. So you better believe that if the map has even a decent amount of water, we'd build the Navark. But Ninja Kiwi noticed this and made us change. Week 25 was on Cornfield, where all the water goes to feeding the crops. This is the first ever boss event on an advanced map. Luckily for us, it's one of the easier ones, but people did have to spend more money defending the early rounds than usual. And the tower of choice? A double gun engineer. This guy's fast attack speed, solid pierce, and ability to pin Bloons in place makes him a beast in the early game, especially on maps with straight lines like Cornfield. But remember how I said the engineer would make a large impact soon? Well, here it is. A change that has stuck to this day is making a 014 engineer for round 34 and placing the trap in front of our monkeys, making sure it traps as many bloons as possible before your other towers help out. The reason this is important is that the trap generates plus 100% income per pop, and round 34 is when tons of bloons start getting sent every round, so it ups our defense quite a bit and our income even more, which came at the perfect time because to farm on this map we have to pay to remove plots of corn, slowing us down quite a bit. But between the bloon trap and stalling the first fight, we were able to defend. Instead of loading the front of the track with our defenses, we waited to attack Bloonarius until he made it to the center of the map. This did delay our farming by a couple rounds, but we were still able to pop him around round 45, so it was worth the trade-off, and the rest of the fight was pretty standard. No breakthroughs in defending came up, just the usual paragons and support for the rest of the fight. The next 2 weeks were some of the easiest boss events in history, Lich on Cubism and Bloonarius on Downstream, both of which allowed for boat farming and had great spots for tack shooters. So players took notes from their ranked peers and defended the tier 1 fight with a tack zone and embrittlement, letting us pop Lich's soul so fast that we lost 0 lives, and take out enough of Bloonarius' spawns to make the cleanup easy. Some players still used the sticky bomb on Downstream, but we had options. Then, farming with the Trade Empire gave us so much money that the next 4 tiers were a piece of cake, especially with a high degree Navark of the Seas. People were worried that it was getting too easy. We'd boot up Bloons on Saturday, and a couple hours later we'd beat the elite boss without breaking a sweat, just mindless farming and getting more than enough money to win. But then Ninja Kiwi started branching out to new ways of spicing up the event. Instead of only changing what map we defend, they started mixing up what heroes and monkeys were allowed, and semi-targeted the meta. This was the era of bans. Week 28 was Lich on In the Loop, and Ben, Sada, Sai, and Ninjas were all banned. This slowed down our farm quite a bit, and the cheap tier 1 solution in the sticky bomb wasn't allowed, so players went with a tack zone on the right side of the map, as there were enough loops for it to pop the soul and chained Moabs in time. And the tier 2 fight was fun if you went with Oben, as he could buff the Avatar of Wrath in the middle of the map. That being said, this was another common week to complete the no hero achievement since Ben was banned. But by the tier 3 fight, we were back on track and could get an Apex Plasma Master, making tiers 4 and 5 just like normal. Then, on week 29, Ninja Kiwi banned the Monkeyopolis, which is a shame as this week was on firing range and we could have made a massive one. This didn't affect the early game, but we had way less money for tiers 3 and up. I couldn't afford an Apex Plasma Master until around 84, and other YouTubers just skipped the Paragon altogether for this fight. Thanks to the map being super farming friendly, we were able to make enough money for more Paragons later on, and we're even close to our normal setup for the final fight. But to get these monkeys took all of our money, whereas in previous weeks we'd have millions left over. But this brings us to update 30. There weren't any new heroes, bosses, or monkeys added to the game, but there were plenty of balance changes. The 2 big ones were the sniper and boomerang buff. The elite defender now gets extra damage to blimps, making it much better at popping bosses. The Moab domination got 10k cheaper, and the Glaive Lord's main attack damage increased from 1 to 8. So it's easier to get pops on him, and the Paragon got 10 grand cheaper. People were excited to see what Ninja Kiwi had in store for us this Saturday, and we got Lich on Hedge with no restrictions. The tons of obstacles did cause some people problems, especially if a chained Moab or Soul made it to the hedges early on, but overall it wasn't too bad. Largely because the Apex Plasma Master did silly damage since there are so many walls for its balls to bounce off of. The next week was much tougher though. Bloonarius on Spillway. It was very common for players to get stuck on tier 1 or 2, as it was much harder to defend than previous weeks. Bloonarius was hard to hurt in the middle of the map as he's surrounded by obstacles and you can only fit 1 monkey in there. To deal with this, we placed a sticky bomb ninja on the barrel in the middle and had to open an obstacle to place our cleanup monkeys. And because they couldn't see much of the track, we needed more than usual. So a couple recursive clusters, more glaives, and alchemists were bought to pop everything. This extra cleanup, plus the map making it more difficult for us to farm early, made the start to the boss event very difficult. And the tier 2 fight wasn't any easier. Players needed an Avatar of Wrath or Mad in time to start popping Bloonarius, and back them up with something like an Ultra Juggernaut to pop all the BFBs that came flooding out. Luckily, this is where the hardships ended, as all we needed for the tier 3 fight was an APM. This normally can handle the round 80 encounter, but when you also add in the fact that it's inside a mostly enclosed circle, its DPS skyrockets. And once again, you could finish off the event with a Navark and another Paragon, so tiers 3 through 5 were pretty easy. Though 1 and 2 filtered out a ton of players. The next few weeks were pretty bland. We had Lich on End of the Road, which was surprisingly difficult, Bloonarius on Spice Islands, which just led to the biggest nav arc we've ever seen, and Lich on Park Path, with Ben and Spactories being banned, though the easy map more than made up for the missing money. The second half of version 30 was a different story though. 3 of the 4 weeks had some wild bans, like week 35, where we fought Bloonarius on Winter Park, but we only had 2 of each tower other than ninjas, super monkeys, and farms, meaning no paragons other than the Ascended Shadow. At first, this sounds like it'd be very hard, but it didn't really affect any of our farming strats or the early tiers of defending. We could still get away with a sticky bomb for the tier 1 fight, a mad for the second, we did the OG Sun Temple and tier 5s for the 3rd tier, and we used an Ascended Shadow for the round 100 encounter. But this is where things got spicy and why this week was fun. Unlike other challenging weeks, the final fight was where things were difficult. Instead of losing on tiers 1 or 2, you could reasonably get to the end before stressing out. But as long as you had a solid Paragon, VTSG, and a ton of tier 5s, you could pop Bloonarius before he got halfway through the track. Week 36 somehow upped this even more by banning all military monkeys and half the heroes, but Ben was still allowed, so that part didn't really affect us. Luckily, we were playing on Monkey Meadow, so the Navark of the Seas being banned was just fine as there's no water. And the only 2 things we had to take into account were popping the 2nd tier with an Avatar of Wrath instead of a Mad, and we couldn't make the VTSG without military sacrifices. But between the Apex Plasma Master, Glaive Dominus, and Ascended Shadow, we still had more than enough to move on. And the final fun event of version 30 was week 37, where Bloonarius was on Moon Landing, but we weren't allowed a Spactory, Village, or Engineer, so our farming was way slower than normal. No Monkeyopolis, Monkey Cities, Bloon Traps, or even Overclocks, making us pretty poor for tiers 2 through 5. The hardest part was the tier 3 fight, as you either had to sell most of your farms to afford an Apex Plasma Master, or struggle through it with a hodgepodge of damage dealers while keeping your economy going. The second you could get a decent Dartagon though, he took over. All you had to do was place him in a spot where he could shoot into 1 or 2 of the craters, and his bouncing projectiles would tear Bloonarius and his spawns apart. And for the 5th tier, I opted for the rare VTSG, as he can see over the walls, damaging Bloonarius the entire time, and he can easily keep the bloons from leaking. The only downside is that he can't see camos, and the village is banned, so we picked up a couple Signal Flare mortars to make sure no DDTs got by. But that brings us to update 31, one of the most influential updates in BTD history. April 13th, 2022, we got a new hero, boss, and Lich got much harder. Starting with the hero, Geraldo was added to the game, the strongest hero BTD6 has ever seen. He's cheap, levels up quickly, and has 16 items in his shop, almost all of which were broken upon release. And while he made every game mode in the game absolutely free, he wasn't an instant hit in bosses. Give him a few months though, and he'll start showing up. As for the boss, we got Vortex. Players had seen him before in Bloons Monkey City, but he's been tuned up to fit into BTD6. To start, Vortex moves much faster than the other bosses, flying about 3 times the speed of Bloonarius and 50% faster than Lich. He also makes any Bloon behind him move 2.5 times their normal speed, causing them to fly through the map if Vortex gets far, and anytime we hit one of his 7 skulls, he gets knocked back 100 units, puts up a wind shield for a short time, and shocks nearby monkeys, stunning them for several seconds. Because of this, many of our normal defenders wouldn't work against him. The Taxone Embrittlement combo would shred through a skull in a couple seconds, but they'd surely get stunned, and all the bloons would leak while they couldn't attack. So the first week against him, players were figuring out what monkeys to use. Some still went with a Sticky Bomb Ninja in the middle of Cubism and put their bloon poppers far away so they wouldn't get stunned, while others, like me, went with a 205 Elite Defender. Ever since the buff that gives him +4 damage to blimps, he's been a solid boss popper, but never really pushed into the meta. But because he has infinite range, we can put him super far away from Vortex to avoid that shock. The only thing is that he doesn't have the most crowd control to defend the round, so players learn to use that to their advantage. You see, if you lose a life with an Elite Defender on the field, he gets 4 times attack speed for a short time, so players would set the sniper to strong, so he'd only attack Vortex and purposely leak 1 bloon to increase his DPS. This took out the 1st tier pretty easily, but isn't even close to enough for the 2nd tier. From past bosses, our main 2 monkeys for this are the Avatar of Wrath and the Mad, both of which aren't the best here. Unless placed very well, the Avatar will get stunned over and over again, and the Mad can't make it through Vortex's shield. This is much less of a problem as it's only active for a few seconds after every skull, and it's much easier to deal with than our damage dealers being stunned. So most players put the Mad far away and popped him with his massive missiles. This put us back on the normal path as we have been defending this way. And for the third tier, most players got an Apex Plasma Master right next to the track, not thinking anything of it. We figured a Paragon for round 80 would be enough, and we were right. Even if Vortex made it to the middle and stunned the Paragon, we were playing on Cubism, a map so easy that he had enough time to tank the stun and still pop Vortex, and the normal rounds aren't hard enough to deal with at this point in the game. We did find out two things though. The first is that if you have enough damage to hit a skull before Vortex gets inside stun range, he knocks himself back far enough that you can repeat this, keeping him far away and he'll never stun your towers. And the second is if you knock back Vortex on top of the Dartagon, he'll be able to shoot inside Vortex's windshield and they'll bounce around inside it, dealing crazy damage. This speeds through the next skull, but will stun the APM as he's on top of Vortex. But it's good to know you can get extra damage every other skull. The tier 4 and 5 fights were pretty similar to other bosses though. We got a Paragon or two for round 100 and as many as we can afford for round 120. The only difference is instead of putting all the Paragons in the best spot of the map, players spread them out to avoid them all getting stunned at the same time. This lowered their DPS, but made sure we wouldn't leak to normal Bloons if everything got shocked. That was on Cubism though, one of the easiest maps in the game, and we get 3 more weeks of Vortex before going back to the other bosses. We have Adora's Temple, A Quiet Street, and Lotus Island, and the first two cause players trouble. Tier 1 was always easy, as you just needed an elite defender with some buffs, but the second tier, that's what got people. We'd usually get a Mad, which in theory would beat the boss, but then round 63 would come and wreck everything. We needed to get a couple more glaives in decent spots to take out the round, especially since the ceramics had extra speed, but we couldn't put them anywhere near Vortex as they'd get stunned. This limited their placements, and we had to plan a bit more than usual. On Adora's Temple, we put the Mad up top and the boomers on the opposite side of the temple as Vortex, but even with this, things got sketchy as the ceramics still got close to leaking. Tiers 3 through 5 weren't bad though, as Vortex's stuns couldn't reach the top of the temple, meaning our Paragons were safe up there. A Quiet Street was a bit different. Ninja Kiwi banned the Apex Plasma Master by only allowing 2 Dart Monkeys this week, so the tier 3 fight was much harder. If players boat farmed, they could get a Navark by round 80, and if they didn't, they went with a Glaive Dominus. Tiers 4 and 5 were simple though, as we just needed a Navark for round 100 and as many towers as possible for the final fight. Something interesting though was a ranked farming strat made its way into elite play this week. Gillid, a ranked player, taught me how to get early banks in the teens. We'd get Ben down and then place 2 200 farms, upgrading the first to have valuable bananas to make more money per round and the other to have banana salvage so we can get that extra sell back. And once we had about $1,000 saved up, we'd sell the second farm and could afford to make the first a 230 bank before round 20. These make more per round than both marketplaces and plantations as they get interest on the money you leave in them, but you can't access this money until you collect it, so you have to make sure you'll be fine for a while. When we collected this on round 29, we had the money for 2 more banks, setting us up nicely for the first boss fight. In fact, we had enough to get an elite defender and keep 2 of our banks, which isn't optimal, but we were still learning how to do this. We pulled this off much better the following week on Lotus Island, though it might have been because of the easier map. Either way, we had about 50k to work with on round 40, letting us get our elite defender and 7 bottom path buccaneers. This easily popped the first tier, and once Vortex was gone, we sold the sniper to build a trade empire. And even though the APM and engineer were banned this week, we easily won. This strong boat farming start let us get a degree 57 Navark for the tier 3 fight, and we could have gone stronger, and we were able to coast through the rest of the event. But that ends the streak of Vortexes. Now we get a rotation of the 3 bosses. Bloonarius was on balance, and with our new bank start, we had plenty of money to take him down. He's already the easiest of the 3 bosses, and the extra money made this week a walk in the park, especially with how good the tax zone is for the first 2 tiers, and the Apex Plasma Master is for the rest, as he's fully enclosed in hedges. But remember how I said Lich got much harder? Well, here it is. Week 44, one of the most hated and remembered boss events in history, Lich on Scrapyard. Everything seemed normal. Every hero and monkey was allowed, the difficulty was set to medium, and we got to play on the new beginner map, Scrapyard. What we didn't know was that this update had a bug that caused Lich's soul to scale its speed and health with free play rounds. Tiers 1 through 4 were just fine, but that tier 5, man, that still haunts me to this day. I mean, I had an Apex Plasma Master and millions of dollars going into round 120, and it still took me a couple tries. What players had to do was get all 3 Paragons, 2 support Sun Temples, and spend the rest of our money on a Super Brittle, Glue Storm, Cripple Moab, and as many Spike Storms as possible. Oh, and we needed a few hundred lives because that soul is still going to steal a ton. We damaged Lich just fine, getting him down to a skull, and we used every ability available. Still, that soul would march through our 3 Paragons and thousands of spike piles like they were nothing. And while the soul was refusing to pop, Lich would slowly make his way through the track, meaning the soul would start farther and farther along each skull. And if you're wondering why it was so hard to pop, it had its HP increased by 240% and its speed by 195%, making it nearly impossible. Even with all this, we barely won. The last soul almost made it to the end of the track, and he'd eaten over 300 lives during this fight, easily being the hardest boss event so far. But because we had to make so much money this fight, there was yet another farming innovation. Instead of going 3 banks in the early game, you can actually upgrade the first bank to an IMF loan in the 20s and use its ability and deposits to get a second IMF a few rounds later. The ability does put us in debt, but there's no interest on it, so it's nothing we can't pay off. Then we'll use the second IMF's ability to afford a Minneopolis on round 34. This, combined with a few more farms and a Bloon trap, can get us over $70,000 by the tier 1 fight. That being said, most people stuck with getting 3 banks or a bunch of marketplaces, as they are much easier to pull off and still give us plenty of money. Ninja Kiwi followed this up with an iconic week: Vortex on logs. On the surface, it seemed like a super easy challenge to make up for an impossible Lich, but there was no selling, throwing a wrench in all of our plans. Our farming and defending is going to have to change. Instead of going for that early bank, we did the OG strat of spamming 200 farms and slowly upgrading them to either marketplaces or BRFs, depending on the player. And for the tier 1 fight, we opted for a Sticky Bomb Ninja, as it could get the job done on logs and it isn't nearly as expensive as an elite defender, so we could go back to farming after picking it up. But here is where people got creative. In the 50s, we made a 2 or 3 farm Minneopolis and got a Mad for the tier 2 fight, neither of which sound great considering we can't sell them. But there were 2 loopholes we could use. We can either sacrifice them to a Sun Temple and fill out the support and military categories, or you could build the Minneopolis on an ice platform, and when you're ready to upgrade, move your ice monkey with a Chinook. This gets rid of the village, and for whatever reason, you get your money back as if you sold it. And we don't have to worry about setting up the bugged $5,000 Monkeyopoulos, because Ninja Kiwi patched that during the stretch of 4 vortexes in a row. But using these workarounds, we were able to farm and defend like usual, for the most part. We got an Apex Plasma Master for the tier 3 fight, we had the money for an Ascended Shadow for the 4th tier, but logs is so easy I didn't even need it, and we made a degree 49 Ninja Gun and a VTSG for the final fight, wrapping it up nicely. Now, I planned on skipping through all the Bloonarius fights for a while, as he's the easiest boss, but week 46 did something big. We faced him on Off the Coast with Sada and Ben banned, almost forcing us to use Geraldo, and ranked strats came into elite play once again. We learned that if you place Geraldo in round 2, you can barely afford his rare Quincy action figure, or NFT for short, on round 6. The reason this is important is that it's a collectible that gains value every round, so the longer we hold it, the more we can sell it for. In regular games, it was common to buy the NFT early and sell it on round 80, but we have something else in mind. If we defend with as few monkeys as possible, we can get a farm on round 12 and upgrade it to a 200. This is pretty normal, but it lets us sell the NFT on round 19 and have the money to upgrade the farm to a banana bank, almost as fast as when we had Benjamin. So even without a money-making hero, we still had plenty of cash to go around. This let us get a second bank on round 29 and a Bloon trap in the 30s, giving us more than enough for a tax zone and support for the tier 1 fight. And the rest was pretty simple. We just boat farmed our way to victory, getting way too much money and an insanely strong nav arc. But near the end of the fight, we started placing Geraldo's level 20 item, Paragon Totems, letting us get a degree 56 Ascended Shadow for the tier 5 fight, even though our ninjas didn't have that many pops. But this got us the win and opened our eyes to the fact that Geraldo is probably the best boss hero. He's just more hands-on than Ben. After the Bloonarius week, we all knew Lich was coming, and his soul wasn't patched yet. Luckily, Ninja Kiwi gave us cubism, put the difficulty on easy, and kept things interesting by banning Ben and making the Bloons go in reverse. So the start of the track is now the end, and vice versa. But the cheaper prices, slower Bloons, and us figuring out how to better use Geraldo made for a surprisingly easy week. We got our 3 banks before round 30, and we could reach them all with a flavored trades Buccaneer for the increased sellback, letting us snowball out of control as I had an Apex Plasma Master and $7.5 million to work with for the tier 5 fight, which let us fill out the map with whatever we wanted. I tried my best, but I could only spend 5 million before I ran out of space, but this is probably the most defense I've ever had, even to this day, in a boss event, and it kept Bug Lich from getting halfway through the map. The next few weeks were free. We had Vortex on Spring, Bloonarius on Streambed, and Lich on Frozen Over, with the only innovation happening versus Vortex where the Ray of Doom came into play in the tier 2 fight. Its laser can pierce the windshield that slows down other defenders like the Avatar of Wrath and Mad, but it's more expensive, so in weeks where we have a bit more money, like here, the Ray of Doom is a solid choice. Also, Frozen Over was the last beginner map to have a boss event on it, so after week 50, every beginner map had been used. But these were followed by an absolutely brutal event: Vortex on Spillway. As you can expect, the map made it harder to defend than usual, but what made it so difficult was Vortex's stun. Him swirling around the middle made it so awkward to place monkeys close enough to him that you'd find yourself down a couple paragons every skull in the final fight. And to top it off, we only had 50 total monkeys to work with, which isn't the biggest deal, but we couldn't fill the screen with sacrifices to paragons or the map with snipers to give us some extra damage at the end. I still remember repeatedly losing against the tier 5 fight 3 years ago, and I think this was my first ever week where I didn't finish the elite boss before time ran out. But this is where we found out that Ninja Kiwi likes to surround difficult bosses with easy ones. Too many hard bosses in a row and players get upset. Too many easy ones bores the better players, but if you mix in a hard event with a bunch of easy ones, more players play than usual. And Ninja Kiwi followed this with Bloonarius on Sunken Columns. Back-to-back weeks of defending on advanced maps. Surprisingly, this was the easiest week of the month, even though they banned the Sniper, Sub, Ace, Heli, Mortar, Dartling, Spike Factory, and Engineer. The map lets you set up your boss poppers up front and clean up at the very end of the track, and if that didn't do it, you had plenty of time to buy more monkeys while Bloonarius was on the edge of the map. There was more than enough water to properly boat farm, and most importantly, the Apex Plasma Master went crazy as its balls would rattle around the middle of the map, and Bloonarius's hitbox was large enough to keep getting damaged. Beating Bloonarius here brings us to the 1-year anniversary of boss events. Week 53 was Lich on Winter Park. Unfortunately, nothing too exciting happened on this one, as Lich was once again set to easy and ability cooldowns were cut in half, so players made tons of money with the Spirit of the Forest, Monkeynomics, and Sniper abilities. We ended version 31 with Vortex on Shoots. The start was normal, but a new tower had been gaining traction against tier 1 Vortex, the Moab Eliminator. While he wouldn't really help with the normal Bloons, his ability is on a super short cooldown and almost one-shots each skull, making for a very fast and easy first fight. After the tier 2 fight though, defending got a bit weird. The Dartagon was banned, so players either went with a Glaive Dominus or a bunch of tier 5 towers for round 80. Both would defend just fine, but many people got caught up in the stuns because Shoots doesn't give you the best spots to place monkeys. Once we realized the stun wouldn't reach over the middle left track, things got a bit easier though. Another weird part was we were limited to just 10 farms. This wasn't the worst thing in the world, as you could make a 10 farm Monkeyopolis and then place 10 more farms, but we couldn't fill out the map like we're used to. Because of the Monkeyopolis though, we had enough money to get by, and for the most part, we kept Vortex in the bottom left of the map. Now, it's been just over a year since boss events were introduced to BTD6. We've come a long way in how to farm and defend at each stage of the game, but August 4th, 2022 brought update 32 and mixed things up a bit. The change we all saw coming was they fixed Lich's soul to not scale with free play rounds. Thank goodness, as we all wanted normal Lich events again. But there were some surprising updates too, like changing the autoplay behavior. Now, if you have auto start off, the game will not start the next round automatically unless a boss bloon is on screen. This changed nothing when you're actually popping the boss, but for normal rounds in between, we no longer have to exit to home and load back in to have a minute to place towers and think. A huge quality of life improvement that instantly made everyone's farming and defending better, as you can spend all of your money every round. What countered this though was the nerf to the Monkeyopolis, and it wasn't something little. No, it's a 33% decrease in cash generation. Now, every $2,000 sacrificed to it generates $200 instead of $300, making it a space-saving option, and it's no longer more efficient than Absorbed Farmed, which instantly ended the 2 BRF Miniopolis while also impacting farming later on. On top of this, the Navark got nerfed to cost $50,000 more, as it was the best Paragon in the game, and Vortex's stun got buffed to now have a larger radius the higher tier it is. Many players already thought Vortex was the hardest boss, and now placing your monkeys against him got even trickier. But on the positive side, we got a brand new Paragon, the Master Builder. Made by combining the 3 tier 5 engineers, he attacks faster every round he's down, and he gets 3 mega sentries that all do insane damage. It was very fun to get him to a decent degree, as the Bloon trap we get early on can be upgraded to an XXXL trap to farm pops. And while not a great way to defend or make money, it was a fun way to get extra degrees on the Engigon, as it was one of the few towers that could be placed up front and secure pops before a Paragon farther back would clean everything up. That being said, many players, including myself and my chat, considered this to be a low point in boss events. Bloonarius and Lich were at an all-time easy, and Vortex was significantly harder, especially with his stun being larger now. And the only way we evened out the events was to ban monkeys or upgrades to artificially make certain bosses harder. The next 10 weeks, or 2.5 months, were basically the same. We'd get an easy map, look at what monkeys were allowed, and beat the boss in one of a few ways every time. Week 56 banned the Spactory and capped us at 3 dart monkeys and 2 boomerangs, preventing the Glaive Dominus, and maxed us at a tiny APM. Week 58 capped us at 2 darts, 2 boomers, and banned the Navark. 59 took away the Monkeyopolis. Week 61 only gave us 5 of each monkey. Week 62 banned the Buccaneer, and week 64 gave us a cap of 35 monkeys to work with. Not to mention that almost all of these weeks banned or limited Spactories and Sniper. If you paid attention during that spiel, you probably noticed I skipped over a few weeks. All of them were Vortex's. During this time, he would have been difficult, but we got him on 4 circles, skates on easy with the Buccaneer allowed, and Cornfield, but the removable cost was cut down to just 5%, essentially making it a beginner map. So as long as the stuns didn't get the best of you, players were just fine and the fights were pretty easy. On the plus side, people were getting better with the Master Builder. He became very popular in ranked play because selling his sentries creates massive explosions that are large enough to pop a full skull of normal bosses, speeding up runs by quite a bit. At this time, he's also used against elites since we'd normally get an ultra boost for farming anyway, but he pushes much more into the meta in the future. This brings us to October 12th, 2022. Update 33 was released, and with it we got a new Paragon and 2 big changes. The Paragon was the Goliath Doom ship, made from the big 3 aces. Instantly, we could tell that it did the most damage out of the Paragons, but it was also the most expensive, coming in at $800,000, and it didn't have an easy way to get extra degrees like the Navark and Apex Plasma Master do. As for the 2 changes, we got a nerf to boat farming and one to the Dartagon. The Trade Empire's extra cash per round it gives to merchantmen was reduced from plus $20 to plus $15, slowing down its snowball effect by quite a bit, but the Flavored Trades upgrade remained at plus $20, and for the APM, it got its attack speed reduced by 16%. So, with farming and boss popping power both toned down, you might think things would be a little calmer, but Ninja Kiwi had other plans. The first week of Update 33 was brutal. Lich unhaunted with no monkey knowledge. Bloons did move at 90% speed, and we started with $1,600, but this week was still difficult enough that guys were recommending people to start with a cash drop or instas. Most people couldn't afford an Apex Plasma Master by the tier 3 fight, causing them to get a Sun Temple and a few damage dealers. And even with these, Lich got very far into the map. Plus, the Buck, Ninja, and Engineer Paragons were all banned, making the next 2 tiers difficult as well. What we did get to see though was the Goliath Doomship in action for the final fight. On top of doing insane damage, he also has a Carpet Bomb ability that you can target anywhere on the screen, and if you used it on Lich, it could take out most of a skull, even in the tier 5 elite fight. So people either used it to kill the soul instantly or speed through the skulls. If you somehow made it through this week, you were rewarded with a much easier time of Vortex on Frozen Over. Everyone was worried about how boat farming would go after the big nerf, but it proved to still be the best way to make money in the game, and we still got plenty of degrees on our Navark. Vortex's stuns were still tricky, but the Asagon made the tier 5 fight much easier. You can put his runway way off in the corner to never be stunned and fly him right over Vortex picks without penalty, and you can get a decent amount of pops on him by buying a Flying Fortress for the tier 4 fight and keeping it for rounds 100 through 120. The next 3 weeks were all pretty easy, with the hardest one being Lich on Adora's Temple, but even that wasn't too bad as the track is very long and you can build towers up top to always have vision of the boss. But that brings us to week 70, where Ninja Kiwi did something that shaped boss events forever. They put Bloonarius' difficulty on double HP Moabs, which doubled his health. This put him at 100,000 HP for the tier 1 fight and 80 million for the final one. This on its own would have been fun, but Ninja Kiwi pulled off the perfect mix of bans in my opinion. They gave us a little extra starting cash, but we didn't get Ben or Geraldo or the Dart, Engineer, and Buccaneer Paragon. We could still boat farm and make tons of money, but it didn't lead to an OP Navark. Instead, it led to a Glaive Dominus for the tier 3 and a VTSG, Aegon, and whatever else you wanted at the end. Tons of YouTube videos were made on this event, and it gave us the variety we were craving. The final 2 weeks of version 33 were pretty normal. Nothing stood out, but the events in update 34 went crazy. We'll start with the update though. On December 7th, 2022, we got a new boss, Bloons. He only has 3 skulls, but he works much differently than the others. These skulls mark his 4 stages, each of which he's immune to a monkey category. He starts immune to primary monkeys, then moves to military, magic, and ends immune to support monkeys. Additionally, he has a ceramic shield that regenerates at each skull, and while the shield is active, he spawns a non-stop stream of rock balloons that have tons of health and will march through your defenses. When you get through the ceramic shield, Bloons speeds up and has lead properties, so make sure you have lead popping power to damage him. As for balance changes, boat farming got nerfed once again, bringing the Trade Empire bonus to merchantmen down from $15 to only +10. Flavored trades are still at +20 bucks, but boy will this slow down our boats. And the other big change was the Glaive Dominus got its price reduced from $400,000 to $325,000, as the Dartagon was performing better than it thanks to the second crossbow master giving it tons of extra degrees very easily. We got Bloons for 4 straight weeks, just like the previous bosses: Monkey Meadow, Frozen Over, Winter Park, and Downstream. At the start, players were very flustered on how to take this guy down, but it quickly came together. For the tier 1 fight, we decided to start with a Sticky Bomb Ninja, as this could work through the primary immunity phase while we placed more defenses. These were normally a ton of Moab Maulers, a Moab Eliminator, or a Tack Zone, depending on the map. We just had to make sure that our Tack Zone could pop leads, so either an Embrittlement or AMDs were put alongside him if we went this route. And it wasn't too hard to get them up and running by the time the ninja got to the first skull. Thankfully, rock balloons don't start spawning until he's immune to military monkeys, so the start of the fight is by far the easiest part. The tier 2 fight was a bit funny though. We'd normally start off with an Avatar of Wrath to handle the first 2 skulls, and once Bloons becomes immune to magic monkeys, we'd build a Mad. If we need more money to do this, we can sell the Avatar, as the Mad should be able to solo the rest, but we didn't always have to. And what's nice is that rock balloons are in the Moab class, so the Mad deals tons of extra damage to them. We used the Mad again for the tier 3 fight to take out the primary immunity phase and pop the rest of it with either a Glaive Dominus or Apex Plasma Master, depending on the player. But with recent buffs to the Boomerang Paragon, it was quickly becoming the go-to option for tier 3 fights, pushing the Dartagon off to the side. And for the final 2 tiers, we'd pick up more Paragons to help out, with the main focus being one of a different category. So you might pair the Glaive Dominus with an Ascended Shadow or a Master Builder for the tier 4 fight, and pick up an Aegon for the final one. That way, you're not especially weak to any of his immunities. But because we needed the money for 2 solid Paragons by round 100, and our money-making strategies recently got worse with the Monkeyopolis and boat farming nerfs, 2 new strats arose. The first was Bloons exclusive, in that we started pushing the Lead to Gold Alchemist to round 26, as Bloons changes the rounds to turn every zebra into a lead balloon, making this guy much more profitable. He also turns rainbows into ceramics and fortifies normal leads and ceramics, but the zebras to leads are the most important part. Other than this, we saw people like Punji using more and more overclocks to farm. Up until this point, overclock had a feature where you could use its ability on a base farm and then upgrade it to a BRF to have overclock last 105 seconds instead of 45, letting one engineer keep up with several BRFs at the start. That changed this update to not work anymore, so players slowly started buying more overclocks to boost their BRFs. Each overclock costs about 60% of a BRF, but makes the farm generate 80% more money, takes up less space, and contributes to the Engigon, but that'll come more into play later. For now, we use this to make enough money to keep up with the Paragon demands of Bloons. But after Ninja Kiwi was done introing us to the new boss, they hit us with 4 incredibly unique events. Week 77, we had Bloonarius on logs. no bans, no weird game modes, but Bloonarius had 300% his normal speed. That's right, update 34 added in boss modifiers to let Ninja Kiwi affect their stats without changing the normal Bloons. So Bloonarius was zooming through this long map. It was a pretty easy week, as defending the rounds or even Bloonarius' spawns required almost nothing, letting us farm like crazy. Even with it being easy though, it was a very fun week. This kicked off the era of modifiers, where Ninja Kiwi started altering boss stats to give us brand new experiences. The fast Bloonarius was immediately followed by Lich on Tree Stump, having half health but double speed, and cooldowns were set to only 40%, so making money with druids and defending with heroes like Sada was simple to pull off. Additionally, the Nevamis was getting more and more popular for defending rounds 40 through 60, as it can solo easy maps for cheap and can build into a flying fortress later on to get pops on the Asagon. The double speed half health was a fun change of pace, but week 79 was even wilder. We got our first ever boss event on an expert map, Vortex on Dark Castle. Luckily, he was slowed down to 75% speed, so it was doable, but it was very fun to play on such a hard map. And because Vortex moves backward each skull, we could keep him near the front for most of the fight. And the final exciting event of the update was week 82, where we took on Lich on firing range. But for the first time ever, we didn't start on round 1. Instead, we started on round 39 with 40 grand. Which is less than normal, but it was nice to skip the first 38 rounds and basically go straight into the first encounter. It was a pretty easy week as well, but it was fun to play catch up on money, especially since this map is so farm friendly. But that brings us to the next update, where some bosses and paragons got their stats changed a bit. Elite Bloonarius' passive spawns got tougher at tiers 4 and 5, so they didn't just get deleted the moment they were created. Tier 3 Lich got about 10% easier as they lowered his health and that of his soul, making this tier fit in better and not be so much harder than the other 4. Dread Bloon got a little faster when his ceramic shield was up, as many players were using this as a rest period to get more towers online, and we got our first paragon synergy in BTD6. The Goliath Doomship can now be buffed by the Navarch of the Seas. If you have both of them on screen at the same time, the Navarch will give the Doomship extra attack speed. And with the Doomship dealing so much damage, it got its price raised from 800k to 900,000. Still a great deal for how much damage it does though. Almost all of update 35 continued the trend of modifying boss stats to keep things interesting. Like week 84's Dread Bloon with 150% speed, week 85's Bloonarius with extra speed but less health, week 86's Lich that started on round 37 with 35 grand, and there were 3 important bans in the Dartling, Spectre, and Village. Luckily, he had 60% health and 75% speed to make this manageable. But that brings us to the dreaded week 87, Vortex on Monkey Meta with extra speed, health, and the difficulty was set to hard. Our only saving grace was that we started with $2,800, so we were rather rich, but the higher prices and stats made people struggle. This is where a new trick made its way into the fold, stalling the Bloons during the first couple fights. Many players knew about this, but this is where it became popular. All you had to do was get a downdraft helipilot and a glue gunner to permastall round 40 while we pop Vortex. The key is to position the heli so that it shoots at Vortex and away from the ceramics it's stalling, hopefully keeping them alive forever. And our boss popper was an elite defender, so he'll never accidentally pop one of them with a stray bullet. This let us beat the first encounter before round 40 ended, giving us way more time to farm than normal. This stalling strat can really only be done for the first 2 fights, because it gets harder and harder to not pop the normal Bloons the more defenses you have, especially once you get paragons involved. But even with this huge advantage, Vortex was still tough to beat. The tier 5 fight was brutal, especially with his stuns going off in the middle of the map, and many people either lost here or barely won like I did. The last 2 weeks of version 35 toned it back a bit though. Dread Bloon appeared on Off the Coast with normal stats, and a weakened version of Bloonarius came on 4 circles. The fun thing about this one though was every primary monkey, the Ace, and Spectre were all banned, so we had to mix up our early cleanup as more glaives and recursive clusters weren't allowed, leading us to use a mortar to pop the skull rushes. And we couldn't use the Apex Plasma Master or Glaive Dominus for round 80, so we had to go back to the Sun Temple strat. That brings us to April 4th, 2023, where version 36 was released. We got some cool changes, like the Glaive Dominus now grants plus 11.1% attack speed to other primary monkeys, including the Apex Plasma Master, and its ricocheting glaives now ignore obstacles, making it more consistent. The Ascended Shadow's price got reduced from 600k to 500k as it was the least competitive paragon, and the Beast Handler got added to the game. It looked like the Megalodon was going to be the new tier 2 killer, as Punchy made a video on how fast it pops each boss, but just a day later, Ninja Kiwi patched it to actually be pretty bad at this job, so unfortunately, it did not break into to the meta. What did become popular though was a new way of farming. Ever since the nerf to the Monkeyopolis, people were all over the board, but this has slowly been refined to become the go-to strat. We'd start by building as many marketplaces as possible before the tier 1 fight. This lets us sell as many as we want to pop the boss, and once we go back to farming, we'll start with an overclocked BRF and then get as many marketplaces or central markets as we can, building them until around 57 or 58. Most weeks, this will give us more than enough for a mat and some support, as we can sell every marketplace if we have to. After this fight, we'll upgrade the BRF to a banana central, still buffing it with an overclock, and from here, we'll just spam BRFs for the rest of the game. As for defending, the Boomerang Paragon only got more popular for the third fight. Although we couldn't get an extra tier 5 monkey to help it out, we'd place 25022 boomers, which gave the Paragon enough power to hit degree 20 and get a ton of extra boss damage. And we'd be in such a good spot defensively that we could either keep the glaive dominance for the rest of the game or sell it if we need to catch up on farming. It was up to us. This was the case until Vortex came unhaunted. We were limited on monkeys and heroes, and it was lining up to be a difficult week. But that's when we found out about Chinook stalling. If you lock a support Chinook in place at the very start of the track, it'll push Bloons back without being able to damage them, letting you stall around as long as you want and be able to use its ability several times per round. It's still limited to the first 3 minutes thanks to update 28 stall farming patch, but that's still $1,650 2 or 3 times per round. Using this, I had $285,000 by round 40, and if you optimize it a bit more, you could get a Paragon for the tier 1 fight. Most people didn't use this as it could cheese any boss, but it was good to know if you started falling behind or something. But for all of version 36, there wasn't a boss with normal stats. Its health and or speed were altered, with the most common combo being less health with more speed. And tied for the second most common was more health with less speed and just less health. What's interesting was that these modifiers were getting paired with tons of tower restrictions, like a max of 20 monkeys, plenty of bans, only allowing 5 of each tower, etc. But many of the weeks had lower ability cooldowns, making for different types of farming and defending. This was the start of the Mashup Era, where Ninja Kiwi altered the map, monkeys, and modifiers all at once to give us unique week. But that brings us to version 37, which had some huge changes. The first was that all Boss Bloons now instantly destroy projectiles upon spawning. This was mostly a counter to spike pile instakills like the permaspike, which was amazing as in the past year, over half the weeks limited the Spectre in some way, with 11 of the weeks straight up banning it, making it the most limited tower in boss events so far. Outside of this, we got a new Paragon in the Magus Perfectus, made by merging the 3 tier 5 wizards. It's pretty powerful, but most of its damage come from its abilities that have long cooldowns and you have to manage its mana, which can be tough to do in boss events. We got a quality of life upgrade for cheap Monkeyopolises, as it now has a base of generating $2,500 per round. The glaive dominus can now knock back the Lich Soul a bit. The Ascended Shadow provides global camo detection and gets tons of extra damage to camo Bloons. And finally, Ninja Kiwi refactored how leaderboard scores were stored so that they could add least cash and least tiers ranking options for boss events. So it's no longer only based on how fast you can pop the bosses, meaning we'll get some different innovations from ranked play instead of just making more money and winning that way. We might learn a thing or two about defending with less monkeys or cash. The first week, everything seemed normal as we just boat farmed against Bloonarius to great success. But week 100 is where things changed. The Miniopolis is back. As soon as we got the money, we made a Monkeyopolis with only a base farm in its range. This cost just under 20 grand, but would generate a whopping $2,700 per round thanks to its new baseline. And we can take advantage of discounted prices and higher yields if we place new farms around it. This gave us so much money that we didn't have to sell much to defend. We could keep the Miniopolis running during the fight and easily transition to boat farming after, making for a very easy week. I mean, we beat the tier 5 fight while Bloonarius was still at the start of the track. We used this for the rest of version 37, which was through week 105. We were drowning in money early and would snowball out of control. To make this fair, Ninja Kiwi banned Geraldo and Benjamin for the final few weeks to make us get off to a slower start. And unfortunately, the wizard was banned most of the time because there was a glitch that let us permanently have his arcane metamorphosis active, making him way too powerful, so the new Paragon was off limits. The one interesting week was 103, where we were only allowed to have 2 Paragons, making us plan out our late game defenses ahead of time. To get around this, we defended with a Dardagon and Glaive Dominus for the tier tier 4 fight while farming pops on a flying fortress. Then we sold them and got an Ascended Shadow and Glaive Dominus for the final fight. After these weeks, we got a new boss with version 38. FaZe, the Reality Warper, was released on July 26th, 2023. FaZe has a camo property and a reality shield that gives it extra movement speed when active. At each skull, it rebuilds the shield, warps forward, creates a portal that makes Bloons spawn there instead of the start of the track, and creates a slowing aura that reduces tower attack speed. And finally, every 24 seconds, FaZe disables camo detection buffs, restores its own camo property if it was removed, and pulls Bloons to its location while giving them camo too. Needless to say, built-in camo detection is a must, and because FaZe gets so far into the track thanks to his warping, we also need some solid range. So our go-to option was an elite defender, but crosspath as a 0-1-5 so he could see FaZe. But if we had some extra money, we could always pick up a sticky bomb to speed things up when he's in range. Speaking of money, the Minneapolis was still very much the play for early game farming, but its base cash generation got cut in half. So now a one farm Monkeyopolis makes $14.50 per round. As for the other tiers, not much is different. The Mad has built-in camo detection, so that's an easy choice for the tier 2 fight, and Paragons can see camos as well, so tiers 3 and up were unaffected. That being said, the Dartagon and Glaive Dominus got their prices swapped this patch, as the Boomerang Paragon was the heavy favorite for the past few months. So now the APM is back to being the cheapest Paragon, and it got buffed to being affected by the 4-4 Monkey Knowledge Point to give it a bit more damage. As for the Magus Perfectus, Ninja Kiwi patched the glitch with its ability, and it got buffed to use less mana with each attack, making it quite a bit better, and players would sometimes use it for tiers 4 and 5. We got FaZe for 4 of the next 5 weeks, with Dreadbloon being mixed in there for some reason. And there were very few limitations or modifiers during this time, as everyone was figuring out the new boss. But once we went back to the 5 boss rotation, a certain tower was banned every week: the Middle Path Alchemist. Its ability led to one of the most popular bugs of all time, called Quantum Entanglement. Using a Total Transformations ability and selling it would lead to some crazy outcomes, like infinite abilities, unlimited temple upgrades, or even selling a boss for an insta-kill. Outside of this, nothing too interesting happened. There were a couple events where Paragons were limited, like only having 2 against Vortex on 4 circles, or 2 against Bloonarius Unhaunted, with its normal version not allowing any Paragon. But most players didn't like this restriction and pushed for other ways of making bosses more difficult instead of limiting the late game, as this was the only time Bloons made it difficult for players to make Paragons in time. What was cool though was the first Elite FaZe event joined the first Lich fight as the only 2 Elite leaderboards to ever have over 5,000 players, and thus are the only events to ever give out top 1% Elite medals, because if there are less than 5,000 players, the top 1% just get a top 50 medal. 2 things that made boss events harder though were the buffs to Lich and Vortex. Lich now triggers his buff drain immediately upon spawning to get around some cheesy strats, and Vortex's stun got shorter, but Paragons no longer resist it. So tiers 1 and 2 got easier as the stuns are a few seconds shorter, but tiers 3 and up are harder on our Paragons, making placement even more important. That being said, we only faced Lich and Vortex 1 time each this update, even though it was 11 weeks long. Version 39 was much more exciting though, in both events and balance changes, and might be my favorite update of all time when talking about bosses. To start, it reworked Paragons to be much easier to create. Instead of spending several minutes building as many tier 4 monkeys as we can fit before merging them, we now have a cash slider where we can directly inject cash into the transformation. This is 5% less efficient than doing it the old way, but it's a huge time saver. Additionally, they made the cash per power requirement be based on how expensive the Paragon is instead of constant across all of them. So every $7.5 spent on the Dartagon will give it 1 extra power, while the Goliath Doomship needs $45 per power. And the other 2 changes were the APM and Glaive Dominus price cuts. The Dartagon was always meant to be the cheapest and somewhat entry level into Paragons, and now that there are more Paragons out, it felt right to lower its price to $150,000. There was also a bug fix that was benefiting Paragon's boss damage by differing amounts, and the APM was hit harder than most other Paragons, so it got a bit weaker and deserved this price reduction. And the Glaive Dominus moved down from $325,000 to $275,000. As for the events themselves, we had quite a few interesting fights here. Week 118, we fought Vortex with almost double speed. Week 119 was the first boss event on Impoppable difficulty, with us fighting Dreadbloon on Cubism, and just 2 weeks later, we got our first half-cash event with Bloonarius on Logs. And the final week of the update, we got our first event with every hero being banned. So if you beat this week, you automatically got the Davids vs Goliath achievement we talked about earlier. Now, we've been speeding through the past few updates because not much of the meta has changed. We still defend early with either a Sticky Bomb Elite Defender attack zone, the Ray of Doom, Mad, or Avatar of Wrath are our tier 2 defenders. We get a Glaive Dominus for the 3rd tier, and whatever paragons aren't banned for the final 2 fights, ideally with a Goliath Doomship and Navark after a full game of boat farming. Recent ways of mixing up the events, like new difficulties or stat changes, haven't really forced us to try new towers. They either make us buy more of what works, or make it harder to afford the standard defenders. Up to this point, we could only fight whatever boss event was happening that week, but Update 40 changed that by letting us challenge any boss on any map, with the only restriction being if there is a boss event active, you can't challenge that boss until the event is over. We can't mess with the rounds or stats, but if you want, you could even fight Lich on Blons, which led to some fun challenges like boss speedruns, but none that we'll talk about in this video. Version 40 started off normal with a tanky phase, but the following week blew everything out of the water. Bloonarius on middle of the road with 300% health, meaning the tier 5 version had 120 million HP. And if that wasn't enough, Ceramics and Moabs had double health, so the normal rounds and his minions were much tougher to take out. But more health means more pops and higher degree paragons. Plus, we started with some extra money, so we were able to move each defense forward a tier. On round 40, we defended with an Avatar of Wrath, 60 had a Flying Fortress and Mad, and paragons for the rest. And our paragons got pretty strong. I kept the same Flying Fortress from around 60 to 120, letting it get over 7 million pops before merging. And we got a degree 76 Goliath Doomship for the final fight. Without that, we would have been in trouble, as Bloonarius still made it halfway through the map. The next week was on another brick. Now, advanced maps weren't that uncommon at this point, but combining this with the Tack Shooter, Heli Pilot, Dartling Gunner, and Druid all being banned made for an interesting week. The tier 2 fight we had to defend with a Carpet of Spikes, which only worked because Lich had 60% health and 150% speed. Even the tier 3 fight was a bit scary with how fast Lich was, as he almost got outside our Paragon's range. But this leads to an important community shift. There's no doubt that players have gotten better over the years and bosses have gotten more difficult, but around this time, many players adopted overclocking their BRFs. We had known that this was good for a long time, but the difficulty has finally caught up to the point where the extra money was worth the effort. After the Banana Central was online, players started alternating between BRFs and overclocks, keeping all of their farms boosted and ideally buffing the Banana Central with an ultra boost. Now, not everyone did this as it was way more work, and if it was an easy week, it was normally skipped. But the fact that more and more people were willing to use overclocks led to more money and much better tier 4 defenders. You see, we already had the most expensive tier 5 engineer in the Ultra Boost and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on tier 4 upgrades, just priming the master builder for extra degrees. And what better time to get it than round 100? We need an extra paragon. It was very easy to get to degree 40, and depending on the week, you could push degree 60. Not to mention, you can get all his sentries down for the final fight, and he'll get 20 rounds to build up extra attack speed. It's honestly a win-win-win. Not every week was tough though. Ninja Kiwi continued to mix in hard ones here and there that would push the meta, while other weeks were easier but maybe nudged us in a certain direction. Like when Vortex only allowed the APM, Glaive Dominus, and Magus Perfectus instead of letting us use more meta late game paragons. Or they just let us run wild against a double health, double speed Dread Bloon and removed the paragon limit, letting us get all 7 if we wanted to. There were 2 interesting weeks after this though. Week 131 and 133. The first was a normal Bloonarius, but Ceramics had 15 times their normal health, making the normal rounds and his Bloon spawns much scarier than normal. And the second was Vortex with half health, but we weren't allowed any paragons. Very unique for an elite event, but we just filled the map with as many strong towers as possible to get through. Update 41 added the submarine paragon to the game. It's called the Nautic Siege Core, deals solid global damage, and can be submerged to decrease the cooldowns of other monkeys, including those of paragons. As for others, the Navark's Grapes got their damage type changed from normal to sharp, so they can't pop leads or frozens anymore for some reason. Geraldo's NFT price was reduced from $750 to $700, which sounds like a buff, but lowering the cost slightly slows the snowball effect, and the Magus got some more damage added to its main attack. Because of that, I use the Magus quite a bit this patch, but I can't say that was the case for everyone. There are enough paragons out these days that everyone has their favorites, and most weeks you can make just about any combination work. The 3 weeks that we couldn't get away with everything were 137, 139, and 141. The first was Lich on Polyphemus. Here, the first two tiers were quite tough, even though there were no stat changes. The Soul and Chained Moabs were just tough to deal with on such an awkward map, with Bloons going both directions, and it was before the change to Polyphemus that made the Bloons travel around the eye, so it was much shorter than the map we have today. But a downdraft helipilot to slow down the rounds helped out quite a bit. Once we got to an Apex Plasma Master though, it was smooth sailing. The second week was 139, where we faced Red Bloon, but he had 500% speed and the normal amount of health. Easily the fastest boss we've faced so far, and he made it over halfway through logs almost every tier. And week 141 was the first ever true expert map where we faced Bloonarius on #ouch. He was slowed down to half speed, but let me tell you, we didn't have much time to pop him or his minions. They only went across the top left track and always threatened leaking. But Ouch has tons of room for farms, and once you get to a certain level of defense, the normal rounds aren't a threat anymore, letting us focus on Bloonarius. Update 42 brought us no relevant changes to the meta, but it did bring some wild events. I'm talking a half-cast Red Bloon that starts on round 38, gives us 80 grand to work with, has lowered stats and limits our heroes, back-to-back weeks of no Paragons with Bloonarius on Winter Park and Phase on Cubism, and week 148 was the second fastest modifier given to a boss so far, with Vortex moving 4 times faster than normal, the last of which I really struggled with because his stuns were going crazy. Vortex was too fast to keep in place, so we had to really think things through. Like the tier 3 fight, we had to get a nav arc at the bottom of the map, and the tier 5 fight took chat and I so many attempts that I ran out of time and had to beat it later in the week. This continued into version 43, where there were only a few balance changes. The Monkeyopolis's base cash got nerfed from $1,250 to $1,000, where it still is today. Phase got made 5% slower when his shield is up, and Geraldo's fertilizer got made 5% worse, but can now be placed on all banana farms instead of excluding banks and marketplaces. But that brings us to the final era, the one we're still in as of me recording this, the era of Mayhem. You'll see what I'm talking about, but things get pretty crazy. Here, the events went just about every other week. Odd-numbered weeks would be easy enough for most players with leveled up accounts to beat, especially if they used a guide. For example, we had Phase on Candy Falls, with the only bans being the Dartling, Ninja, and Super Monkey, and even-numbered weeks were a challenge, like week 152, where we fought Lich with 600% health, taking the spot of the highest HP in boss event history with 144 million at tier 5. I mean, we had to get an Apex Plasma Master for the tier 2 fight, and we overclock farmed for the rest of the event. Week 154's Dread Bloon was on Muddy Puddles, being only the third boss event to occur on an expert map, and we were limited to having 60 monkeys down at a time, which sounds like a ton, but once you fill the map with farms and boats, you aren't left with too many monkeys to build Paragons out of. And 2 of the final 3 weeks were on new game modes. We had Bloonarius on alternate Bloon rounds and Vortex on military monkeys only. But if that wasn't enough, we were limited on how many boats, helis, and snipers we could place. Players seem to like tougher maps that we haven't played on before, and version 44 gave us 3 of them. Lich appeared on Geared in week 162, Dread Bloon attacked Protect the Yacht just 2 weeks later, and in week 167, Lich challenged us on Bloody Puddles, a map I honestly thought I'd never see in a boss event. He had half health and only 40% speed, but still, that's a short map, and the Monkeyopolis was banned. The other things version 44 gave us was a new tower, the Mermonkey. While they didn't make any splashes in defending or farming, there was an interesting new mechanic. The final upgrade of the top path lets you place water monkeys in its radius even if it's on land, and you can fit several buccaneers in there, making it much easier to boat farm and or make the Navark on maps with less water. There were 2 other unusual weeks here. Phase on In the Loop, where we weren't allowed monkeys that have a Paragon upgrade. So on top of a no Paragon week, the Dart, Boomerang, Boat, Ace, Submarine, Wizard, Ninja, and Engineer were all banned. And the last event of the update was week 168, where we had 2 different maps. The first was 168A, where we could fight Vortex on Hedge, but that only lasted 2 hours and 22 minutes before being changed to End of the Road, and all the modifiers got much easier. But this brings us to version 45, where a new boss was added and several Paragons got balanced. Starting with the boss, Blastopopulus is coming over to BTD6 from Bloons Monkey City, but he got amped up to fit into the game. First appearing on October 12th, 2024, Blast is unlike any other boss. He has purple properties and weakens towers with reduced range and slower ability cooldowns. At each skull, he spews fire fireballs that create pools of magma, disabling selling, ability cooldowns, slows attack speed, and he places large rocks that block line of sight. Attacks slowly heat him up, with fire, plasma, and laser attacks doing this much faster, and you can cool him down with ice monkeys. If overheated, he explodes in range, stuns towers, extends cooldowns, and causes projectiles to burn out extremely fast. As for the balance changes, the Glaive Dominus's price was reduced from $275,000 to $250,000, as many players had been moving over to the cheaper Apex Plasma Master as of late. The Navarre's Grapes got changed back to normal type as we couldn't handle the loud lead tinking screams. The Ascended Shadow got its Sticky Bomb buffed to do more single target damage. The Master Builder's attack speed and damage got reworked to incentivize building it earlier for the attack speed per round buff, and the Subagon got its main attack nerfed but its submerged mode buff. Outside of the new boss, we got 3 insane events this update. The first was Dreadbloon on Winter Park. It was the first week back from all the Blast of Populaces, and we were hit with a double health and 5 times speed Dreadbloon. For the first time, we were allowed all 8 Paragons to help us get there, and we started with $2,900. The second was Bloonarius on Cubism, but we were playing on chimps, so no farming, selling, monkey knowledge, and absolutely no leaking. Luckily, we got custom rounds that sent way more Bloons, so we had more than enough money, but it was a very fun change of pace and one of the most remembered events to date. And the third was Lich on Spring, but we maxed out at 20 monkeys, so farming and making Paragons was kind of a nightmare. Plus, we weren't allowed Ben or Geraldo, so we ran Sada, who was nice for popping the balloons, but even a hero takes up one of our precious monkey slots. Oh well, we could sell a bunch of farms to make a Paragon and then replace them all. The next week came with version 46, where the Crucible of Steel and Flame was added to the game. Made from the 3 tier 5 tack shooters, the Paragon is very cheap, coming in at only $200,000. It deals solid damage in a short radius and is the first Paragon to not have camo detection. Fortunately, it can receive the Ascended Shadow's camo vision buff, so that's a nice synergy. Outside of this, there were 2 cool changes. The first was the Navarre's Merchantman buff was changed to increase the max number of merchants from 20 to 40, letting us boat farm like crazy after getting a Navarre down. Pretty niche, but can lead to some fun scenarios. And the other was reducing the Magus's mana drain rate during Arcane Metamorphosis to help it fit better in boss windows. It's always had solid DPS, but it's hard to time it right, so this will make it last longer. As for events, we got a surprising amount of easy ones in a row. That is, until week 182, where the record for the tankiest boss was set again. Bloonarius came on 4 circles with 650% health, clocking in at 325,000 HP at tier 1 and a whopping 260 million at tier 5. Every Paragon was on the table, and we had oodles of money, enough to get an Apex Plasma Master by round 60, and the amount of pops we could farm on him let players get a couple degree 60 plus Paragons for the final fight. The next week was a half health double speed Lich, but we only had support monkeys to work with. Spike Storms and a Meg were our best friends until we could finally afford a Master Builder. Even after that, we filled the map with Spectres to help out, and week 185 was full of restrictions against Dreadbloon. We were only given 2 or 3 of each monkey, making it very interesting to farm this week, and we weren't able to build any Paragons. But with a bunch of tier 5 monkeys and a true Sun God, we were able to take this weakened Dreadbloon down. One fun thing was the Tachagon started pushing more and more into events. He was not great versus Phaser Vortex, but the other 4 he's pretty solid. His high DPS in a short range combined with his low price makes for a great addition, and you can easily get him to degree 60 by sacrificing 100 upgrades and maxing out his cash slider. Version 47 made things a bit easier. Blast's heat bar no longer fills immediately when spawning, and all of his stuns got knocked down a second or 2. As for Dreadbloon, his Rock Bloons lost 1000 health at tier 3, but now scale with boss HP and speed modifiers. But neither of these bosses had extremely tough weeks. What we did get was Bloonarius on Quad, the 4th event on an expert map. Once we got rolling, the normal rounds were a non-factor, and because Bloonarius was slower, we actually had a decent amount of time to take him out. Outside of this, we went back-to-back weeks in 189 and 190 that limited our Paragon potential. Week 189 only gave us 40 towers to work with and a Paragon limit of 1, while the next week gave us unlimited monkeys, but Paragons weren't allowed. And week 192, we were allowed every Paragon, but maxed out at 20 towers. So 3 of the last 5 weeks of the update limited our late game. Speaking of which, version 48 added a new Paragon. the Mega Massive Munitions Factory. Made from the 3 Tier 5 factories, this behemoth of a tower comes in at $800,000, making it the second most expensive paragon, only behind the Goliath Doom ship. In short, it creates a permanent carpet of spikes through the entire track, similar to the Spirit of the Forest, places insanely strong mines near it, and has 2 abilities. The first increases its attack speed for a short time, and the other distributes small mine bombs around the entire track that deal tons of damage. As for other changes, the Magus's Metamorphosis cooldown was reduced from 120 to 90 seconds to better line up with boss skulls, and the Rubber to Gold got some surprising buffs, with it now throwing its gold potion every 2 seconds and its duration got doubled. But upon version 48 being released, we got a 1-day April Fool's boss event where we faced Lich on Bloons, the shortest map in the game. He was super weak and slow, but the short map made it incredibly entertaining. The Carpet of Spikes went crazy on this short map, the Tachagon dominated the turn, and the Spactagon did millions of damage in the last fight alone. Not to be outdone, week 197 had the highest boss modifier ever, with Dreadbloon having 2000% speed on In the Loop. Thank goodness he only had 20% health, because he and the Rock Bloons were absolutely zooming. Even with the lowered HP, this week was brutal. We were limited with the Banana Central and Monkeyopolis being banned, so players had much less money in the late game than usual. But a solid Spactagon plus a Paragon of a different category was enough to pop his 5th tier. For the rest of the update, almost every boss event was free, with the most difficult one in my opinion being Blast with 200% health and normal speed. But there were no tower or hero restrictions, so our economy was off the charts, especially with the new Rubber to Gold buff on the Alchemist, making basically every Bloon worth more money. This was bound to change though, and in update 49, the Rubber to Gold kept its new potion speed, but the cash multiplier was reduced from 3 times money to 2 times. A pretty big nerf, but it was well deserved. Outside of this, the Engineer Paragon traded in some of its weapon damage for something new. Now, his nail gun deals 300 bonus damage to bosses instead of 500, but he learned the Power Glove ability. It's an improved version of Overclock that can target paragons and also applies an overclock AoE around the target. So get ready to buff your best paragons with more attack speed. Finally, we got 3 balance changes to bosses. Dreadbloon's rocks were a little too difficult, so they got slower and less HP, while Dreadbloon himself got slightly faster at later tiers. Lich and his soul got slower at every tier, and Blastopopulus got a bit faster across the board. At this point in boss events, I thought I'd seen it all, as we're on week 205. But version 49 ripped off 3 unique fights in a row. The first was a triple health Blastopopulus on Cracked, which required a ton of high level paragons to take down and a good amount of stalling the normal rounds during the fight. But many players made use of the Lord of the Abyss's extra water to get a solid nav arc, and a new monkey was added to the game this update, Desperado. While not great for bosses, he can give towers extra range, which we used to make a massive Monkeyopolis to afford everything. And you know we were using the Master Builder's Power Glove on the Aegon for the final fight. Ninja Kiwi followed this up with a 500% speed Bloonarius on carts and darts, with limited heroes, no Desperado, and no Ace. The hardest part was definitely the tier 1 fight, as we didn't have much time to defend, but tiers 2 through 5 were much easier, with the last 2 being handled by the new and improved Magus Perfectus. His arcane metamorphosis ability shreds bosses, especially when you combine it with a power glove. Week 207 went a different route. Instead of insane stats, the elite boss was played on Impalpable, which sounds fine until you realize it was Lich and there was no way to get extra lives. So if you don't pop the soul fast, it's an instant loss. Everything was allowed and we started with 5 grand, but it was still a doozy. If you had full monkey knowledge though, your mana shield could tank a siphon or 2. Still, the tier 5 fight was insane and we needed a ton of damage to beat this week. But after these 3, the next few were a walk in the park. A nice change of pace from the start of the version, but that brings us to the present, at least at the time that I'm writing this. August 8th, 2025, we faced Bloonarius on Cubism, a very easy map with few restrictions, but here, on week 212, Bloonarius had 25 times speed and 80% health. This guy was moving. At the first tier, we had to pop him as fast as possible with a Mad and clean up all the skull rushes with a super Maelstrom. It didn't stop there though, because we got a degree 40 APM for round 60 and a degree 60 Master Builder for the tier 3 fight. These were only possible thanks to the extra starting cash and boat farming. Players hit the limit of 4 strong Paragons by the end, and still Bloonarius made it very far. If he didn't pause for a few seconds every time you hit a skull, he surely would have leaked, but but it made for quite a fun event and a great one to end this video on. We've faced 212 weeks of bosses, with the challenges constantly changing. At the start, it was mostly the map determining how hard it was. Then it transitioned into game modes and monkey restrictions, and once boss modifiers got added to the game, the challenges were endless, especially once they were combined with the previous ways of making unique events. In summary, we faced Bloonarius 61 times, Lich 50, Vortex 39, Dreadbloon 29, Phase 22, and Blast of Populace 11 times. Most of these came on easy maps, as 64% of them were on beginners and 24% on intermediate ones. Every beginner map has been used, and the only intermediate maps left to have a boss event on them are Bazaar, Water Park, and Covered Garden. 8% were played on advanced maps, we've got 5 events on experts, and 2 on challenge editor exclusives in Protect the Yacht and Blondes. But that was the entire history of boss events in BTD6.